Hi, I'm Aurelia. The day my parents shoved a suitcase across the floor and told me to leave was the same day the state called my name and handed me a check for $4. $2 million. They said I brought shame, said I was a burden, said I had no value. And that suitcase, they pushed it, like they were shoving me out of their story forever. But what they didn't know is that before the sun even set, I'd bought the very house they kicked me out of without them ever realizing it. You think that's the worst part? It's not because what I uncovered after that tore through generations of lies. What would you have done in my place? Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from? And who in your life has ever made you feel invisible? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. The clink of a fork against a chipped plate was the only sound in the house that morning. The sun hadn't fully risen over the quiet suburb of Raleigh, and yet the kitchen was already colder than a January wind. I sat at the table, hands curled around a lukewarm mug I didn't even remember pouring. My mother stood by the stove, turning eggs in the skillet, with the kind of detachment that told me her mind was miles away, or maybe just preparing for something she wasn't ready to say out loud. My father, seated across from me, kept his eyes glued to his phone, tapping his thumb with mechanical precision. No good morning. No how did you sleep, honey? Just that wide, awful silence that made even my breath feel intrusive. I knew something was coming. You always know when your presence starts feeling like clutter in a room you once belonged in. When my mother finally spoke, it wasn't with anger. It was worse. It was businesslike. We think it's time you start standing on your own 2 feet, she said, not looking up. I blinked, unsure I heard right. I've been standing on my own, I said softly. I'm not here for money. I'm just between leases. You're almost 40, Aurelia, my father cut in, still scrolling. You've had plenty of time to figure things out. My stomach dropped. It wasn't about a lease. It was about me. I have a full-time job. I pay for my car, my phone, everything. You're not married. You don't have kids. And you're still here, my sister Callista said, from the stairs, her voice sharp as glass. She wasn't even trying to mask the smirk spreading on her face. My mom stepped away from the stove, walked across the kitchen, and slid something across the floor toward me. It bumped into my chair leg. The suitcase, the old brown one I used back in college, with the frayed handle, and the little turtle sticker I stuck on it during my sophomore year. I hadn't seen it in over a decade. I looked up, heart pounding. You're serious? We're not doing this to be cruel, Dad said. We just think it's time, like I was a project long overdue for closure. You have 15 minutes, Mom said, wiping her hands on a towel like we just finished brunch. Callista folded her arms at the railing. I told them you'd take it badly. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask for one more day. I just stood up. I packed nothing. They didn't offer anything. Everything I owned was boxed in the garage or tossed. I didn't know. The suitcase was still half-zipped from when I last used it. I picked it up, its weight unfamiliar but grounding. As I reached the front door, my mother called out one last time. Wait. I turned. She tossed me a knitted hat, blue and gray, slightly stretched out. I knew that hat's. I made it for her during my first winter break from college. She wore it the day I left for school again, crying at the bus stop. Here, she said. So you don't freeze? We're not monsters. I stared at it in my hand for a second too long. Then I stepped back to the porch and placed it gently on the doormat. I know, I said. That's why this hurts. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I didn't ask why. Silence was the only dignity I had left. I walked down the driveway, suitcase dragging behind me like the ghost of every "you're not enough" they never said out loud, but showed in 1,000 ways. At the bus stop, I sat on the cold bench and pulled my coat tighter. I had no plan, no cash, no apartment lined up, but I had breath. I had quiet and I had time. The street was empty, save for the occasional cars swishing past. I watched my breath fog up in the morning air and counted how many birthdays, holidays, emergencies I had dropped everything for. I gave everything. They gave me 15 minutes. That's when my phone buzzed. One notification from the State Lottery Commission. Me? The vibration of the phone in my coat pocket startled me more than it should have. My fingers, stiff from the cold, fumbled as I pulled it out. A single alert glowed on the screen, brighter than the rising sun. North Carolina Lottery Commission. Official notification. At first I thought it was junk. Some spam message trying to lure me into a scam. But something about the format, the seal, the wording, it wasn't generic. It was official. I stared at it. Then I opened the message. Dear Miss Aurelia Ellis, we are contacting you as the holder of a verified winning ticket from drawing number 1120I. Your entry has matched all 6 numbers. Estimated prize for $200,000. I blinked once, twice. Then I reached into my wallet, hands trembling as I pulled out the slip of paper I had tucked behind my expired library card. I had nearly thrown it out when I cleaned out my purse last week. The edges were bent. A coffee stain bled into the corner, but the numbers were still legible. 24, 13, 39, 08, 315. I read the numbers in the text again. They were the same. Exactly. I don't remember the sound I made, but it wasn't joy. It wasn't even relief. It was a kind of laugh, short, sharp, almost bitter. The kind you let out when something so absurd happens, you can't trust it's real. Not yet. 2 weeks earlier, I had been standing in the fluorescent light of a gas station just off exit 17, bleary-eyed after tutoring night students at the Adult Learning Center. My body ached. My throat was raw. And I had a stack of ungraded essays in the car. I was bone-tired and felt invisible. I had grabbed a bottle of water, a granola bar, and on impulse, a lottery ticket. One of those decisions you make, not because you believe you'll win, but because for $5, you can buy 5 minutes of foolish hope. The cashier, a wiry man with tired eyes and a sharp tongue, had raised a brow as he scanned the ticket. Another one joining the delusion parade. He asked with a grin. I offered a tight smile. He leaned closer. Maybe it'll buy you a better family if you do win. He chuckled. I didn't. Back at the bus stop, the cold didn't bite anymore. My mind was elsewhere, racing, reeling, revisiting every memory of feeling dismissed, unseen. What would I do with $4? $2 million. The first answer was stupidly automatic. I could help them. I could pay off their mortgage. Buy Mom a better car. Set up a college fund for Callista's twins. That thought lasted 3 seconds. Then another truth hit me harder. They had thrown me out with less compassion than I had ever shown a stray cat. My hand hovered over my phone thumb, trembling over my mother's name in my contacts. For a second I thought about calling. Not to brag, just to hear if her voice would sound different if she knew. But I didn't press it. Instead, I opened the hotel app and booked a room downtown, somewhere warm with clean sheets and thick curtains. For the first time in years, I ordered something for myself. Chamomile tea and a real meal. No checking if anyone else needed something first. No, let me save money in case Mom needs help with groceries or Callista needs a break with the kids. Just me making a decision for my own comfort. Back in that quiet hotel room, wrapped in a towel after the hottest shower I'd had in months, my phone buzzed again. It was a voicemail from Callista. I didn't want to listen, but I did. Just so you know, Mom says you left a mess in the guest room. Real classy. Don't expect to come back. She hung up without waiting for a reply. I sat on the edge of the bed towel, dripping, hand gripping the phone too tight. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just deleted the message. Then I reached for my suitcase to find a clean shirt. And that's when I saw it. Folded in the corner, almost camouflaged in the lining, was the knitted hat the one Mom had thrown at me, the one I'd left behind. Somehow it had ended up with me anyway, like some lingering thread I hadn't snipped. I picked it up slowly. The yarn was looser than I remembered, stretched and faded. I didn't cry. I didn't throw it out either. I folded it neatly, respectfully, then slid it back into the bottom of the suitcase, beneath my clothes. The next morning, I walked into the bank with a hat, a suitcase, and a claim slip worth millions. The bank's glass doors hissed open with a soft whoosh as I stepped inside, suitcase wheels rattling gently behind me. The knit hat was tucked neatly beneath my arm, not as warmth now, but as a reminder, a symbol. One I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep or discard. It was just after 9 in the morning. The branch was quiet, too quiet. Carpet muted every footstep. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. A row of tellers stood behind their stations, all in matching navy blue, polite smiles, locked and placed. I approached the closest one, a woman maybe 10 years younger than me. Her name tag said Gracie. She looked up from her monitor, blinked at me. Then her gaze flicked down to the suitcase and back up to my face. Her smile faltered. "Hi there. How can I help you today?" She asked, eyes already suspicious. I didn't blame her. I probably looked like someone who had slept on a bus bench. Same coat, same boots, same everything. Nothing about me screamed millionaire. I slid the paper across the counter. "Please verify this and call your manager," I said evenly. She glanced at it, did a double take. Her fingers hesitated above the keyboard. Then she cleared her throat and picked up the phone. I didn't look away. I didn't fidget. If I had to be doubted again, let it be the last time. A few minutes passed, filled only by the quiet tapping of keys and murmured voices from nearby desks. Then a man in a charcoal suit stepped out from the back office. "Miss Ellis," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Darren, the branch manager. Let's step into my office." He was courteous, but I saw it in his posture, the shift from dismissive to deferential. One glance at the document and the tone changed. The slip was real. The money was real. I sat across from him at a wide oak desk, the hat and suitcase resting by my feet. He offered me water. I declined. "We'll need to start the verification process formally, of course," he said, tapping into a tablet. "It'll take a few days for the funds to be fully accessible, but this is life-changing." "Congratulations." I nodded once. "I'd like to set up a private investment account." "Of course, we can guide you through everything. You'll want to work with one of our fiduciary advisors. Also," he paused, peering into his monitor, "Ellis, are you by any chance related to Robert Ellis? He used to come in years ago. Managed the Ellis Family Trust." My fingers stiffened around the armrest. "I don't believe so," I said carefully. "What trust?" "Oh," Darren said, frowning slightly. "It's probably not my place to say, but he used to handle all the paperwork personally. It wasn't a huge amount, but sizable enough. Mostly earmarked for his grandchildren, I think. I'm one of them." The silence was sharp. "I see," he said, his voice tightening just slightly. "I can check what's publicly visible, but your name doesn't appear on the current beneficiaries. Never has, I assume." He didn't answer that. Just gave the kind of smile people give when they don't want to be sued. I left shortly after paperwork, in a neat folder, the manager's card tucked into the back. The sun outside was too bright. I slipped on sunglasses I didn't remember packing and walked until I found a small hotel lounge open for early coffee service. It was quiet, only 2 other people in the room, a man reading the Wall Street Journal and a woman scrolling through her phone. I sank into a leather chair and pulled my coat tighter around me. In my lap, I unfolded memories I hadn't touched in years. I remembered the spelling bee in 5th grade. I had spent weeks preparing, memorizing words no one else in my class could pronounce. Conscientious. Obfuscate. Chrysanthemum. The day I won, I came home glowing. Dad had looked up from the TV and said, "That's nice, but your sister just made varsity." It wasn't disappointment. It was indifference. That was the first time I understood that love in my family came with a scoreboard I couldn't see. And somehow I always started behind. Years later, when Calista couldn't make rent during college, I'd covered it. I skipped dinners. I took double shifts at the library and gave her everything I had, sometimes lying to Mom and Dad, pretending I had a scholarship extension just to explain why I had nothing left. They never asked. They just let me do it. Not because I was generous, because I was disposable. But now I had a number attached to my name that they couldn't ignore, and it had nothing to do with their approval. I finished my tea slowly, savoring each sip. Later that day, I returned to the bank and met with an advisor named Michelle. She had kind eyes, didn't ask unnecessary questions, and explained everything without the slightest trace of condescension. When she handed me the final papers to sign, I paused. "Name on the account?" she asked. I looked at her, then down at the page. "Aurelia Ellis," I said. "Just mine." She smiled. "Perfect." My signature was steady. For once, it didn't feel like I was borrowing someone else's future. It felt like I was writing my own. I left the bank with a folder in hand and a calm I couldn't quite describe. Not happiness, not yet, but something sturdier. Resolve. By the time I pulled into Aunt Faye's driveway in Fayetteville, the morning had stretched into a lazy gray afternoon. My car's heater was still warming up as I sat parked for a full minute, trying to figure out what I'd even say to her. It had been at least a year since we last spoke, maybe more. I gathered the suitcase, slung my purse over my shoulder, and rang the bell. 2 soft chimes echoed inside. The door creaked open halfway. She stood there in an apron dusted with flour, a wooden spoon still in her hand. Her hair had gone fully silver since the last time I saw her. "Aurelia." She blinked, startled. "Well, I thought you were staying with friends." "That's what your mama told me." I gave her a tired smile. "She didn't mention the suitcase, huh?" Her eyes drifted to the scuffed handle in my hand. Something passed over her face. Guilt, maybe. Or memory. "Come on in," she said, finally stepping aside. The house smelled like cinnamon and cloves. She'd probably been baking something from scratch. Faye always did things the old-fashioned way, even her regrets. We settled in the kitchen. I wrapped my hands around a mug of tea she poured without asking. She busied herself at the counter, chopping apples for a pie. She clearly didn't need to make anything to avoid eye contact. "Did they really kick you out?" she asked softly. "They did." She turned. Just like that. I nodded. The silence between us thickened. It wasn't new, just deeper now. "Remember that dinner when I was 19? I asked. "You were there. Mom and Dad invited you and Uncle Roy before he passed." Her brows knit slightly. "The one where your mom made that rosemary chicken?" And I suggested I help with the business. I said I wanted to learn how things ran. Thought maybe if I earned my way in, I'd matter more. She nodded slowly. "I remember." Mom told me, smiling, "That's sweet, but we don't do charity hires." Faye winced. I hated that. "You didn't say anything." "I know." She wiped her hands on a towel, then sat across from me, folding them on the table like she was preparing for confession. "I need to ask you something, and I want the truth," I said. "Why didn't you ever say anything about the trust?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked toward the window, where the bare branches scratched gently against the glass. "They told me you weren't part of it for your own good," she said finally. "That you needed to find your own way, that you'd never thrive if you got too comfortable." I let out a bitter laugh. "That's not protection, Faye. That's punishment. They wanted me poor. Kept me scrambling so I wouldn't ask questions." She shook her head. I didn't agree. But your father and mother, they made up their minds early. You were always the one they couldn't predict, couldn't steer, so they locked the doors before you could find the key. Her words dropped like stones. I wanted to scream, to throw the mug, or cry, or walk out. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at the pie crust forming under her hands. Perfect edges, always neat, always composed. They decided roles early, she said, voice low. Callista, the heir, you the helper. Me. I was just supposed to stay quiet. Why'd you listen? I asked. Because when I didn't, they froze me out too. It's a pattern, honey. You're not the first. That hit harder than I expected. We sat in silence. The only sound was the tick of the kitchen clock and the faint bubbling of apples on the stove. After a while, she stood, walked to the back pantry, and returned holding a small manila envelope. It was yellowed at the edges, sealed with tape. I wasn't supposed to keep this, she said. Your mother asked me to destroy it. I didn't. I took it gently, hands trembling. Inside was a folded letter in my grandfather's handwriting. His signature was still bold. I read the first lines, then froze. He had named me not Callista, not the girls. Me. I always said it should have gone to the one with the clearest eyes, he wrote. Aurelia sees what others won't. The original beneficiary. I closed the letter. You knew, I said. She nodded. I didn't know how much it would matter until they erased your name. I didn't know they'd pretend like it never existed. I stood, the chair creaking behind me. My voice was steady now. I'm not just here for revenge, Faye, but I am here for the truth. She met my gaze. Then you'd better be ready for what comes next. I slipped the letter back into the envelope, zipped it into the inside pocket of my coat, and picked up my suitcase again. I already packed. The drive to Charlotte took just over 2 hours, enough time for my stomach to turn knots and then untangle again. I had no plan other than to show up. That in itself felt like a small revolution. I'd bought a dress the day before. Clean lines, bold color, no frills, not expensive, but chosen by me for me. The kind that didn't whisper trying too hard, but still managed to stand out in a room full of sequins and curated champagne laughs. The rooftop bar shimmered with gold light strung above polished tables and glistening glasses. The skyline flickered behind the gloss. Waitstaff moved like shadows in tuxedo vests. It was Valora's favorite kind of setting. Elegance for show, exclusivity for sport. I stepped inside and paused. Her laugh reached me before her gaze did. Then she saw me. Everything on her face froze except her lips. Who told you where this was? She asked. I didn't flinch. Nobody. I read the city like I used to read you. Her jaw twitched, but she didn't make a scene. That wasn't her style. Not in front of strangers. Someone handed me a small badge. White plastic clipped with a lanyard. Guest support, it read. A mistake. But my sister didn't correct it. Of course not. I removed it slowly and placed it flat on the marble table between us. Even now, I said calmly, you're embarrassed by me showing up in my own clothes with my own name. Valora picked up a flute of Prosecco and sipped without answering. A few heads turned. My presence hadn't gone unnoticed. I could feel the weight of stares, quiet gasps, a couple of whispered, "Is that her sister?" She motioned toward a far-off table, one near the sliding doors to the terrace. You can sit over there. I didn't move. A man approached with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Valora smiled wide. Thank you. We'll take 2? She paused, eyes sliding back to me. Actually, just 1. I turned and walked slowly to the bar, ordered a glass of water, then circled back and leaned on the railing near the edge of the terrace. Charlotte's skyline looked calm, unaware. I held on to that. Soon after, I heard a chime of glass and Valora's voice. To family that supports you, she said, raising her glass and knows when to stay in their lane. A soft ripple of awkward chuckles passed through the crowd. Someone clinked their glass anyway. My grip tightened around the stem of mine. My knuckles turned white. Faye's envelope was heavy in my purse. I didn't pull it out. Not yet. Instead, I excused myself and headed down the corridor toward the restrooms just to breathe. That's when I saw it. A framed sketch hung on the wall near the powder room entrance. Soft pencil lines colored in with childish care. A little girl and a cat beneath a tree. It was mine, drawn at 10 after our cat Clover had died. But it was signed Valora. I stepped closer and traced the corner. My original initials had been erased, barely visible under the lamination, just enough to make me feel the burn of it all over again. Even my crayons weren't safe around you, I muttered half to myself. My heartbeat returned to normal as I walked back to the party. The crowd dimmed, now the drinks flowing smoother. The music shifted to soft jazz. Valora posed for photos with a group of friends I hadn't seen since college. The kind who'd unfriended me after Mom called me emotional at Thanksgiving. And then I walked to the DJ. He looked up as I leaned down and spoke quietly. He raised his eyebrows. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." A few seconds passed before the first notes rang out. Our father's favorite song, Ain't No Sunshine. Raw, slow, heavy. It didn't belong in this setting of laughter and gold. That was the point. Valora stopped laughing. Mom, seated near the bar, turned her face away. I stepped into the center of the dance floor alone, and I danced. Not to be seen, not to reclaim space, but because I could. My body moved with quiet rhythm, grounded in something that had nothing to do with them. The weight of years lies rolls shoved on me like hand-me-downs. They all lifted for that moment. When the music faded, no one applauded, but no one interrupted. Valora's smile didn't return that night, but mine did, and I wore it all the way to my lawyer's office. I left the rooftop behind as dusk settled over Charlotte, a hushed weight of light and heat. The heels clicked differently now, not in submission, not in doubt, but in a rhythm that sounded more like punctuation. By 8 Surrem. Ma. The next morning, I was already seated in a high-rise office off Tryon Street. Midtown neutral walls, glass doors, subtle air conditioning humming like it had secrets. The receptionist greeted me politely, eyes skimming over my simple navy blazer and the legal-sized envelope in my hand. I didn't need anyone to be impressed. I just needed things done. "Miss." Laurier, a paralegal, called from the side. "We're ready to register the LLC whenever you are." I followed her into the glass conference room, set the envelope down. "This entity will hold all lottery-linked investments, charitable contributions, and future acquisitions," I said evenly. No relatives on the documents, no amendments by outside counsel, no signatures but mine. She hesitated only a moment, then nodded. Understood. As she reviewed the file, I slipped in a second set of documents labeled Property 1786 Pine Hollow Way. She glanced up. Transfer of title. Eviction proceedings, I said, sipping from a coffee someone had left untouched. The current tenants are in violation of occupancy. She blinked. Do you know the tenants? They're my parents. I didn't offer more. She didn't ask. Not out of coldness but principle. It had taken months before the lottery money cleared. Anonymous, protected. I used the delay well. The house on Pine Hollow had been bought through one of my shell corporations. No red tape, just clean legal maneuvering. They kicked me out thinking it was their domain. Turns out they were squatting in mine. Flashback 6 weeks earlier. The agent handed me the pen at closing. You sure you don't want the deed under your name? I'm sure. He'd smiled, assuming it was about taxes. He didn't know it was about reclaiming the very ground I'd been erased from. Back in the present, I scrolled my signature on the last page, slid the folder across the table, and stood. Let's move forward, I told the room. Across town, the first tremor hit. Valora's phone buzzed during brunch, her third mimosa untouched. Eviction notice filed. Pine Hollow Holdings LLC versus current tenants. Her lipstick smeared slightly as her mouth fell open. She did it. Faye's voice came crackling through the speaker when called. She didn't start this war, she said gently, but I think she's finally ending it. I didn't need to hear the panic to feel it. The house was more than wood and nails to them. It was their seat of control, their version of legacy. Mine would look very different. That same afternoon, I sat across from a woman named Mara, director of the Havenwell Women's Shelter. We met at a quiet cafe near Freedom Park. I'm here on behalf of an anonymous donor, I said, sliding a certified check across the table. She blinked down at the amount. Are you sure? She whispered. There's a stipulation, I added. The scholarship arm will be called the Lumen Fund. It's meant for women rebuilding educational grants, vocational training, safe housing. Mara's eyes misted. Do you know what this means to us? This changes everything. Her voice cracked. I knew her vaguely. Years ago, my mother had mocked her at a church fundraiser, calling her that unmarried liberal with the rescue complex. Now here she was, holding a hope they couldn't touch. I left quietly, declining a photo or statement. They didn't need to know it was me. The only person who did was me. By early evening, I was back at my place. The small porch looked west over a line of trees turning red-orange in the soft start of fall. I brewed tea, chamomile, and honey. The phone buzzed just as I settled into the rocker. Valora, they know. No subject, no punctuation, just that. I didn't respond. Didn't even look at it again. Instead, I let the steam curl up and around my face. The air was still warm, but something had shifted. For the first time, the silence didn't carry weight. It carried peace. They thought they'd buried me beneath shame. They didn't know I'd built a ladder with every stone they threw. After the porch tea, I didn't sleep much. Not from stress, but clarity. That kind of stillness that doesn't lull you, but arms you. When morning came, I didn't check the headlines. I didn't need to. I knew they'd spin it. And they did. By 3 p.m. My sister was on a local morning show out of Charlotte. Clean-cut host, floral set velvet couch. She looked too comfortable. Valora? Her voice was syrupy, her hair carefully curled like innocence. The screen beneath her read, Family Rift After Lottery Windfall. Sister breaks her silence. I watched from my apartment, sound low, tea gone cold in my hand. She's always had issues, Valora said, drawing out the pause like she was plucking sympathy from the air. We took her in when no one else would. But once the money came, the mask fell off. She's bitter, ungrateful, estranged for a reason. The host, visibly uncomfortable, murmured something about hope and healing. Valora smiled, chin tilted. She wasn't cut out for family responsibility. Some people aren't. And frankly, I'm glad we helped her back when she needed it. I blinked slowly. They weren't just rewriting history, they were syndicating it. Back at the office, Faye was already moving. While Valora painted herself as the wounded heroine, Faye was logging into our secure press drop. The show was airing live, which meant it wasn't too late. I texted only 2 words, upload now. 2 minutes later, the host feed shifted. The screen flickered. Then audio, not our faces, just sound. Valora's voice, crisp, undeniable from the hallway of our parents' house. Get your trash out. You're dead to us. And her husband following behind. We'll rip that check from her cold hands if we have to. The show froze. Dead air, then frantic scrambling cut to commercials, then a full broadcast drop. By sunset, the clip had over 2 million views. Live Mike exposes family lies. The hashtags wrote themselves. Comment sections filled with lines like, she took her in. That's taking in a punching bag. She just canceled herself in HD. That host deserves hazard pay. By evening, I sat with the last piece of truth. I hadn't touched the old will. It had been buried in a filing cabinet at Aunt Faye's, an unsigned draft from years ago. My name listed first not just as a beneficiary, but as the heir primary, unquestioned, scrolled in my father's handwriting. To Aurelia for her constancy, then scratched out dated weeks before I won the lottery. They hadn't just disowned me. They tried to erase the part where they once believed in me. I scanned the document, filed it digitally quietly with my legal team. Let it speak. No viral posts, no captions, no hashtags, just facts. Across the country, the news cycle picked up steam. Screens showed side-by-sides of Valora's interview and the mic drop moment. The phrase "grifters next door" trended. TikTok edits paired her sound bites with dramatic music. And then they found it. A photo from my eviction day. Me on the curb, suitcase beside me, knitted hat falling out of my hand. A neighbor's door camera had captured it. Timestamp and all. That image hit hard. Even strangers began posting. "You don't throw away your child like that." She left in silence and still they screamed. It became a symbol not just of me, but of everyone who's been tossed aside by people who claim to love them conditionally. Valora and her husband canceled their next appearance. The church quietly removed their photo from the bulletin board. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years sent me a text. I had no idea. "I'm sorry." I didn't reply. Some apologies don't need answers, just acknowledgement. They tried to weaponize shame on live television, but shame, it turns out, had already changed sides. There's a weight that comes with walking into a courtroom even when you're right. I adjusted the collar of my coat, the same one I wore the day I stood outside my parents' house, with nothing but a suitcase and a hat. The coat still smelled faintly of cedar and shame. I didn't wear it to make a statement. I wore it because it reminded me what survival felt like when nobody offered you shelter. The courtroom wasn't packed, just a few reporters in the back, some staffers, and of course Valora sitting stiffly beside her lawyer, her lips set in a line that had nothing to do with humility. She looked up once. I didn't blink. "Miss." Laurier, her attorney, started with a voice that sounded like a smirk, suing one's family for defamation and misappropriation. "This won't sit well with the court. It reeks of emotional vendetta." I kept my voice even. And rewriting someone's life publicly on television doesn't... The judge didn't look amused by either of us. We got through opening statements fast. Valora's side argued I was resentful, unstable, greedy, that this was about a lottery win and some long-festered grudge. But then my side spoke, and we didn't lead with the money. We led with a number a joint account opened when I was 17. My first small freelance gig, designing a wedding invitation for a local couple. They paid me in cash. My father deposited it for me, said it was safer this way. I believed him. We showed the transaction records and then the withdrawals, all without my authorization, even years after I moved out. And after the plaintiff was evicted, my lawyer asked, flipping to the final page, he turned to the bank officer on the witness stand. Yes, she confirmed. Withdrawals were made using the secondary account holder's card, still active under Mr. Laurier's profile. Post-disownment. My lawyer repeated, letting the silence hang. This case, he said, isn't about the lottery. It's about decades of quiet erasure of being treated as a utility rather than a daughter. Valora scoffed. Are we really going to act like a couple $100 from high school is a crime? I leaned into the mic. It wasn't the amount. It was the message. You owe us for existing. Gasps were small but audible, but nothing compared to what came next. My Aunt Faye stood up in the back row. Your Honor, she said, her voice trembling but steady with permission. I'd like to play a voicemail left on my phone 2 weeks ago by accident. The judge nodded. She tapped the speaker. My mother's voice crackled through. If she wins this case, we lose everything. Why didn't you just let her disappear? The courtroom stopped breathing. Valora's lawyer closed his binder slowly, as if that might somehow stop what had just detonated. The judge's brow creased. That's not just negligent. That's deliberate. Valora whipped toward her husband, hissing, "You said it was delete it." He shot back, "You're the one who couldn't keep her mouth shut on TV." Reporters scribbled faster. The judge banged his gavel once, twice. Enough. 30 minutes later, the verdict came down in my favor. Full damages. A public apology mandatory to be delivered on the same show where they'd tried to bury me. But I didn't smile. When the judge asked if I had anything to say, I rose, walked to the front, and kept my voice low. I didn't need their apology. I just needed the truth to stand where they tried to knock it down. And I pulled something from my coat pocket. The eviction note, creased, frayed at the edges, written in my mother's neat, distant handwriting. "You've made your choice. Don't come back." I didn't read it aloud. I just held it for a second, then folded it in half and tucked it back. As I walked out of the courthouse, the sun hit my face like a memory. That note, I kept it. Not to remember the pain, but to mark the day I stopped begging for a seat at their table. I didn't turn into the driveway. I just eased off the gas as the old house came into view. Quiet now, a ghost without a family to haunt it. The porch light was off. The shutters chipped. A foreclosure sign swung lazily from the front post, creaking in the breeze like a porch swing left behind. I didn't need to park. My name was already on the deed, hidden behind a shell company. Bought at auction for a price lower than my pride ever sold for. It was never about revenge. It was about closing a circle. I pulled to the curb across the street and let the engine idle. It was a late spring afternoon, golden and deceptively warm. I cracked the window. The scent of honeysuckle mixed with distant cut grass, same as it always had on this street. But something felt different. I didn't ache looking at that house anymore. This house isn't a home, I whispered to no one. Not anymore. I turned off the engine, stepped out, and walked slowly along the side fence. Same warped gate, same ivy curling up like old secrets. The hedge was still there, overgrown but alive. I knelt down beside it, brushing back damp leaves and bits of pine straw. My knees sunk into the soft dirt as I reached into the space beneath the hedge. I knew exactly where to feel where the tin had been tucked 20 years ago behind a brick-shaped stone. It was still there. Rust had crept across its seams, but it held. I pried the lid open, fingers trembling, half expecting nothing inside. But there it was, a handful of Polaroids. Me holding a puppy, me in a Halloween costume. I'd sewn myself, my dad pushing me on a tire swing. Crumpled sketches with my name scrolled in the corner and one folded note yellowed with time. To my brightest light, happy 10th birthday. Don't let the world dim you. I read it aloud, my voice barely above a breath. Funny how people forget the kindness they once gave, especially when money walks into the room. That note was written before inheritance lists and trust funds and shame. I folded it back up. I didn't take anything with me. Some things don't need to be dug up to be healed. I stood, dusted off my knees, and let the lid click shut again. By the time I returned to the car, the sun had dipped low. Evening crept in around the edges of the streetlights. The phone rang. I let it buzz twice before I looked. Mom. I stared at the name longer than I should have before answering. Her voice cracked first. Are you satisfied now? I leaned back against the headrest. No, I said softly. But I'm free. There was a pause. I let it grow. She said, We thought you'd never make it without us. I didn't yell. I didn't flinch. I just answered, You were right. I didn't make it without you. I made it despite you. This time, I ended the call. The line didn't deserve a goodbye. Later that week, I found myself at a gallery tucked into the edge of the city, quiet and warm, filled with pieces that felt more like confessions than decoration. I walked to the back where a single spotlight fell on a sculpture. My sculpture. A resin cube enclosing a paper note creased with handwriting still legible. You've made your choice. Don't come back. It sat inside a cracked suitcase frame, the one I'd wheeled from the porch that day. The title placard read, Inheritance by a Lorne. A young woman near me whispered to her friend, "Was this based on a real story?" I turned, smiled faintly. Real enough to become art. She didn't ask more. I left through the rear entrance, letting the spring air wrap around me. The same coat on my shoulders, but a different woman inside it. And as I stepped outside, I realized the suitcase they left me with had carried more than clothes. It carried my truth.